to work on Keystroke POS directly inside the program and mainly looking at data files. So it's going to, the presentation, the screen itself is going to be kind of boring, but we'll try to move it along and get through it as best we can. Nick, if you can switch over into Keystroke directly, we'll start there and then we'll move from Keystroke into the file manager and look at the data file structure themselves. Keystroke uses a proprietary internal database engine. It's a little bit different these days than what some other programs are using, as far as we're not using a standardized, centralized file server where all file information, and not just the information itself, but the retrieval of the information is based on a centralized program. A server-based program like that within the Keystroke environment would be more like what KeyPay is, if you're familiar with using that, where you have a single program that everybody shares and communicates with, and you have to make sure that program is up and running. The database engine in Keystroke is internalized within Keystroke, so you don't have a separate program to maintain and make sure it's running and configured and making sure the machine that it's hooked up to is operating correctly. It does use, however, a centralized data structure, data set. So everybody is sharing the same physical data, but each person has their own database engine that is sharing the database. So that's what they call a file sharing structure. One of the advantages of this type of structure is that it's easier to set up. It can be faster in certain situations. You don't have to have a separate machine to run it on, and so forth. Within Keystroke, once you're inside the Keystroke program, as we are here, the first thing you need to familiarize yourself with, and we've hopefully covered this before in the past, is the Shift F12 key. See, do I have control, Nick? I have control. Okay, here we go. All right. Okay. The Shift F12 key brings up this Keystroke status screen. It's something you should all be familiar with. It's very helpful when you're setting up Keystroke and using Keystroke to figure out what's going on, especially if something doesn't happen to be looking correctly. A lot of information about the licensing, the status of the system, the data files, whether they're open or not, is what we're seeing down here. The thing we want to look at right now, though, is the data Dir directory, and this shows us where the data is being deposited. So on this particular system, we're running Keystroke in the D:/Keystroke location, and the data is in the tutor directory below that. This can change, of course. In a standard system, that would normally say data. If you just run Keystroke by itself, we're running with sample software, so our sample data, so ours comes up as tutor. Yours might come up as store1, store2, or it may say F:/KS data or K:/KS data, or whatever you may have. So that lets you know the location of the data file. So if you want to go out and look at your data files, one of the first things you should do is hit Shift F12, check this, and then you know where you need to go. While we're on the screen, we also have other information as far as other directories, like the user directory, which is where we put our temporary files. If you need to look at that, we're looking at which is our current toolbar file, our forms file, our printers file over here. And all this information is displayed on the screen because while these are standards here, the forms.dat and the printers.dat, there are ways to override that, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. As I mentioned down here before, we have a list of all our standard files, and I want to start with this. This file information here, this is not a complete list of all the data files we use, but this is pretty much a complete list of all the really big important data files. These are what we call our database and transaction files. These are the files that actually do run through our database engine, where we sort and search and look up and find things. So we have the configuration file, kscnf.dat, and one thing you'll notice on these is that they all begin with KS. All the files that utilize the internal indexing and database engine within Keystroke begin with KS. The other files with that are like tables, tax tables, price tables, and so forth will not begin with KS. So that's one of the ways you can kind of differentiate them, and you can use that with copy commands if you need to pull out batches and so forth. The first 5 here are standard database files. The one after it, matrixing, is also a standard database file now, and this is the contact file that contains all your contacts. The one in the middle here, file number 6, kstr0001.dat, that is your transaction file. All transactional data, and what we mean by transactional data is not just sales, it's anything really that has a date associated with it. If you store a piece of data and that thing happened at a particular date and time, it will go into a transaction file, and almost all data of that sort goes into our standard transaction files, which is kstr001.dat. And that's important. We'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. The rest of the files will go into these, what we call our standard database files. Okay, let's go ahead and talk about the location of these files and the ability to share these files in a multi-store environment. Down here we're seeing the list of the database files. We see the status, which is all zeros. That means these files are not open at this time. A status of -1 means it's open for read access, which means it should not be blocking any other program from accessing it. And then a status of either, well, actually the only other status you would see would be 4. Actually, no, 2 or 4. It means that the file is open and locked, where it's locking out other people from seeing it. So if you have a problem on your system where one machine is getting files locked by another user, you can go and look at some of the other machines. You can do Shift F12 on them and see whether any of them have the file and actually have it locked. And if they do have it open and have it locked, the status here will be set to 2 or 4. It really should very rarely ever see that. Keystroke does a good job of not keeping the file open and locked. We try to keep it closed as much as possible. If you're in a record list box, you will see the -1, or if you're running reports, you'll probably see the -1, but in most cases it'll just come up as 0. But again, the -1 does not block out other people from using it. So if you see this machine has a -1 on it, that's not locking the file, it's just looking at the file at that time. Okay. In the right column here, we have the directory where that's coming from, and you see that they're all the same, and it seems kind of redundant to have all this information here. The reason this is here is so you can change and share each individual file with multiple instances of Keystroke, and in most cases this would be in a multi-store environment. There are some other small cases where you may want to split out and have one machine using a different customer set than the others. That would be very strange and difficult to maintain, but it is possible. The way you change these is in your ini file, which is your ws.ini file. You would put in an entry where you would specify that this file, and you don't actually use the file name, you use what it accesses. So for customers, it's CUST for customer, dir equals, and then you'd specify the location. So we can go out to look at that. I'm not sure if I can. Nick, can you pop up a file manager just so I can go from there? Okay, that should be good. Do I have control back? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I got it. I think I have it. Oh, okay. You want to change that? Okay. Sorted by name. Okay. So down here we have this ws.ini file. All right. So double-clicking out that, and again, we've talked about these in the past, but the WS files, there's ws.ini, and then there's a WS1, a 2, a 3, whatever other register numbers you have out there, machine numbers, will specify that's for that particular one. For this particular instance, you normally not want to do that. You want to put it in the ws.ini file, and that way it'll be shared by everybody, so everybody's going to use that directory, that shared directory. So in this case, if I want to share the customer data, custdir equals, and then it may be, if it's just hanging off of my standard keystroke directory, I don't have to put in the whole path. I can just put in, say, store 1 here, or what a more common thing would be, might be just data, which is your master data. So I'm running out of tutor, but I'm telling the program, even though I'm running in tutor, or I'm running in store 1, or I'm running in store 2, I want to pull from a common customer database. So I put custdir equals data backslash, and that way everybody that uses this directory, and you need to make this change in all your stores data directories, that they're all going to then use that common customer database. Uh-oh, that's not good. Oh, I tried Alt-Tab and I ended up Alt-Tabbing myself. So if you can Alt-Tab us back into Keystroke. Okay. So back into Keystroke again. I'm not going to go out and reload enough stuff, but if I were to exit Keystroke and come back in, this entry here, the kscst.dat, would then change to be keystroke / data. It would be different than all the others. So that's how you share a data file amongst other people. At this time, I want to go in and talk about the transaction files, which are different files. Again, all these files have a similar structure internally, and we're not going to go into that much detail. One thing to be aware of, though, is that any file that begins with KS, meaning it's a database file, a blank file is going to be 8,192 bytes. So if you were to go out to your file manager and look at the file and it's 8,192, that means it's a properly formatted database file, but the file is empty. If it's less than 8,192, it's not a proper database file, and something really has really gone wrong. So that's just something to be aware of. The transaction files are slightly different than the other files in that they have this number system. And the reason for that is there is not just one big, huge transaction file that everything goes into forever. We separate the transaction files, and we use one for a while, and then when it gets full, as we described, although it's not really full, but it's full enough, it's as big as we want it to be, or its time has ended. We've reached a month, or we've reached the end of a year. We want to switch over to another transaction file. Then what will happen is we'll just go to the next number. So in this system, the current transaction file is kstr0001.dat. On another system, if you go into your own system, that may be number 34, maybe 562. It can be any of those numbers all the way up to 99999, which is billions of transactions. The file handler, you don't have to worry about this. Everything inside of Keystroke handles this automatically, this jump from file to file to file. If we exit out of here, actually, okay. In the configuration manager under parameters, I don't think this is the right. Do I have control now? Okay, sorry. Okay, under the database settings, so again we're talking about database and just files. Transaction files are database files, are just special. We have this split on parameter. And we can see right here the max size is 40 megabytes. So that's where I was saying if the file gets full, it's going to split and start using a new one. 40 megabytes is just what we define as the default. You can actually put anything in there. Our old default a long time ago used to be 1 megabyte. 40 megabytes is a decent size file. It'll hold a lot of transactions. But if you want it bigger, you can set it to bigger or smaller for some reason. Really, the more important thing here is the split on. That instead of splitting on size only, meaning it's going to start using a different transaction file at some random time just when that one gets full, you can set the system to split on a particular break. And we have week, month, quarter, year, and hidden down below so nobody can see it and nobody will use it, we have daily. This was from the older version, version 6 and before, where we had an 8 megabyte limit on our transactions file size. So some stores were busy enough that they needed to split out daily. We no longer have that limit, so there's no reason to do it daily. By week or month. Monthly is the most common for any type of store. If it's a really, really slow store that doesn't do a lot of transactions, then quarter or possibly year might make more sense. And the reason you would change that and set it to particular things is in the sales manager, at certain times, like when we go here to the edit print function, these are what we call a record list box. This is a special list box that's looking using the database engine interactively, so you can set filters, you can change the sorts and so forth at any time. You can use the quick search feature down here by typing in a number. It jumps to that thing instantaneously. These record list boxes can only show one file at a time. With your database files, it doesn't matter, but with transaction files, it does. If you have a transaction file that is what we call split, meaning you have multiple files, if you're looking at a file from this month and what you want to be looking at is a file from the previous month, then you need to switch from file to file, and that's control page up, control page down. You can also use control home to instantly jump to another file. So if you want to look at a file that's from 5 years ago, you can just type in that date here and it will jump to that file. This data set doesn't have other files, so it's a little hard to see that. But that's where that break becomes important, is when I'm looking for a transaction, when I'm looking it up by customer number or by number here, how much information do I want to see at a time? And if you want to see it a month at a time is enough, then that's probably what you want to set it to. And it's very quick and easy to switch. As I said, it's control page up. It happens very quickly. It's not a big deal to switch from file to file to file. You just don't want to have to go back through hundreds of them. Okay. I'm now going to ask Nick to load up header.exe. Header. So header.exe is a special utility we have to go in and look at and maintain the transaction files. As I mentioned, each file has a date range. You can go in and view and actually alter those date ranges using this header.exe utility. This utility, we don't put it on the start menu. So we don't give it really easy access to it on purpose because we don't want people going in there and messing stuff up. But as a dealer, when you're going in and maintaining somebody's database, if they decide they want to switch stuff around, if you're having a problem, usually you'll be talking to tech support when you do this. We'll use this header.exe program. And the header.exe program will allow us to view all the transaction files. It'll allow us to view the splits on them. Okay, so here we have in this system, we can see that we have actually 3 different transaction files. We have kstr001.dat, 2.dat, 3.dat, and then this last file, kstr.dat, with no number on it. This is what we call the main file. It's the master file. It's really just a starting point. So when the program goes in, as you enter the program, what it really wants to do is it wants to find the current transaction file. And the current transaction file is going to be the last numbered file. So in this system here, it's file number 3. So we're obviously using a different data set than we were looking at before. So what this file is used really is just a pointer back to this file. So as Keystroke goes into the program, it looks at this file, looks at the file back, which is KSTR003, and it knows that's the real starting point. It's going to start at the last file, or what we call the current file, which is actually a misnomer. It may not be the current file. If you've been with us for a long time, in version 6 and before, that always was the current file. In version 7 and forward, it's in a lot of cases, it's the next file. So this is probably the file that's going to be next month's file. and the current file is going to be the one above it. The reason for that is if you wanted to enter a transaction into the future, it needs to have a place to go. So it goes into that, it'll end up in this file, and then when that file splits off and creates another one, then should hopefully be in the right place. Okay, and looking at these files, if you're having big problems where the system can't find stuff, again, you should just call tech support and they'll help you with this. But the program, when it goes to find a transaction for a particular date, it doesn't look through every single file. It jumps to the file that has that date range. And the date range here are serialized dates. I'll show you a little trick. If you go to your calendar, which is the F6 key, if you hit Shift F11, in the lower left corner down here, it'll show you a number. That is the serialized date of the current date showing in your calendar. So if I switch this to July 1st, okay, we can see that the number down below changes. So 10409 is the date for July 1st. So if I wanted to find out where 0348 is, I can just keep arrowing up and looking at that number down below until I find the number I'm looking for. And that's the date, that's where those serialized dates come from and how you can look at them and figure out what they are. You can also just hit the Enter key on it and it will tell you 0348 is May 1st. Okay, so this file here was split, the system diff it hasn't been used for a while, but it was created on May 1st. So this file here holds the data from April 1st to May 1st. All data before that is in the previous file. All data after that is in the next file. And the next file is here, and file back is here. The system does use those entries. They do need to be correct, even though they are going to be in sequential. So if you look at this, you can tell if things are messed up pretty instantaneously, where the very first file is going to start on 0. It's going to go to some particular date, and then it's going to show what the next file is, which is 2. And you go to 2. These two dates are going to be the same, because that's the end of this date has to be the same as the start of this one. This one's going to go to a date, and the next file is 3. If it needs to go backwards, that's 1. So you can see there's a pattern here, and that pattern should always be what it needs to be. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of what the transactions files are. Again, if you look over here on the right at the size of the file, you can kind of tell how many transactions are in it. So this one has quite a few. This one doesn't have hardly any. These two are blank. The 8K, which is 8,192, is a blank file. All right, so that's it on the transaction files. If you have problems with transaction files and you feel like you need to go into the header program and make any changes, you should be talking to tech support unless you've done it before and you're really comfortable with it. We do have some other utilities to go and play around with that. We have a transaction split utility where if you decide, hey, I want these all to be 40 megabytes and they're 3 megabytes, you can run that program and it will go through and clean them up. And if you want to pre-split, if you want to say, hey, I want files for the next year, you can use that utility to give you a monthly file over the next year. So there are utilities to go in and help you moderate and work with those. Okay, so that is the transaction file. One thing I did want to mention, though, is it doesn't happen very much anymore, but it used to be that people would get this, when they went into the program into Keystroke, you would get this, there's a post-dated transaction message. That can still happen, and what it means is there is a post-dated transaction in the current file. And how that happens is, as I said, you can post-date transactions in Keystroke. So right now I'm in the month of July, and for some reason I want to enter a sales invoice or a sales order or a purchase order or something off into the future. You really shouldn't do that. There's really not a great argument for doing that, but some people like to for some reason. So if you enter in a transaction that's going to happen in the future and you go ahead and type it into the system and you post-date it, meaning you give it a date sometime in the future, which is very easy to do. You just go transaction number date. You go down here and type in, I want this to be in 10/1 or 10/14/13. Okay, it will allow me to do this. It is going to give you a warning to remind you to just make sure you're not making a mistake, because that is an unusual thing. And we've now assigned a transaction number and a future date. When I save this transaction, it's going to go into whatever file that date is currently described at. And in this system, that file is going to be the last file on the list, and that file does not have an ending date. So I could have typed in not just 2013, I could have typed in 2020, and it would still go in the same file. And then as you go on and use the system normally, it's going to, as you get to the end of every month, it's going to create a new file for the following month. Well, what happens is at some point in time, it's going to create a file for October of 2013, but that file is going to be a blank new file ready to use for October 13. The system is going to recognize, hey, wait a minute, there's an October file in the previous file. There's a transaction in the previous file that doesn't belong there. It belongs in this file. So that's what we call a post-dated transaction. It's a transaction that's in a file that it doesn't belong. It's based on its date. Its date is beyond the date range of the file it's in, and that transaction needs to be moved. The way you move that transaction is you go to the Configuration Manager under File, Pack, and you use this pack function. You can, that last message was when you use the pack function to make sure nobody else is using the system at the same time. It's going to ask us to make a quick backup. I'm going to say no to that. And here we can pack any of the files. We go to a transaction file. We tell which transaction file we want to pack based on the date range, and we pack that file. And what that'll do is it'll rebuild the file. It'll move any transactions that are dated, that have a date that does not belong in that file. It'll go ahead and move them and put them into the correct file. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's no big deal. It's just a painful thing if it happens every single month, which in some people it can. If you date it 2020, every single month that's going to happen to you. It's going to create a new file for the next month. It's going to say this transaction's in the wrong file. You need to pack the file. So if that happens to you, it'll tell you what the date is and what the type of transaction. You need to go in and fix that transaction, basically. Or you need to pre-split, what we call pre-split, using the TRN split function, and split things out until you get to that date, and then everything's happy. But packing the file is not that big a deal. It doesn't really matter. It just becomes obnoxious if you have to do it all the time. While we're in the pack function, we also have packing of database files. Again, this is something intrinsic to the data structure and the database engine. When you pack a file, any file, it'll take that file, copy it to a TMP extension, and then read everything back one record at a time. Anything that's been deleted or is garbage that it doesn't recognize, it will toss out. So this can be used for fixing up a file that has a problem. If there's not really any big problems in it, everything will come back and everything will look normal. If it has huge problems, packing a file cannot magically fix something. Where if you've had a problem with your hard disk and the file on the hard disk itself has gotten messed up, where it just has weird stuff in it, and usually it'll be a Word document or something like that, where the pointers on the hard disk it's lost track of where the data is. So you have a major problem there, and you're going to have to go to a backup. If you just pack the file, it will fix the file, and that you won't get any errors anymore, but there may be half your data may be gone. So you do need to be careful after you run the pack to go in, especially if you're doing it to fix a problem. Make sure you go in and look at the data, make sure the data that you expect to be there is there. If you've been around for a very long time, it used to be 20 years ago that there were some database engines out there that recommended you pack or re-index your files every month just because they had a problem maintaining them. We don't have that issue. You don't have to pack your files on any type of schedule. The data gets reused as you very well. We don't really have size limitations. There's no real big reason to pack function on a regular basis.
You may want to mention not to pack twice also.
Oh, that's right. That's where I was leading to. Yeah, so if you pack once, it first renames your data file to a TMP directory. Pack, check around, make sure everything's okay. If everything's not okay, do not pack again. If the first pack didn't work, the second pack isn't going to work either. And what happens is when you do your second pack is it renames the file to that TMP extension again, which means that at that point you have completely lost the original data file. And if you don't have a good backup, it's gone forever. So the best thing to do there is you pack once. If everything's great, you move on. If it's not great, you should go out and copy the TMP file back to the DAT, so you're back to where you started, and then call tech support, and we can go from there and work on other ways of getting you cleaned up. All right. Moving on, that's pretty much it. Those are the major data files and the things we really wanted to talk about today. I do want to mention there are lots of other data files. As mentioned, there's the forms file, there's the printer files. If we go under tables, we have the tax tables and the price tables. Let's look at tax tables. Okay. So the information that's here is stored in its own data file. The information for districts and so forth, they're all stored in their own individual data files, and they pretty much make sense. The tax table codes, districts, and so forth are stored in in files that begin with TAX. Price tables and codes and formulas are stored in files that begin with PRC. So you can pretty much make sense out of most of those. We are going to make available to you, those of you that have been to previous dealer summits and trainings have this information in your previous manuals. Those that haven't, we're going to, at the end of this, Dave Hunsinger is going to post on the Yahoo forum an excerpt from a previous manual, to dealer summit training manual. The pages that talked about what I just covered as far as the files themselves. It lists all the different file names and what each one does and what it's for. So we will post that on the Yahoo forum and make that available to you. We will also include that probably in the documentation we hand out at the next training that's going to be in Las Vegas. Hopefully you all can make it to that. We'll have a lot of information there. Some of the information we're not going to cover, which is why we're covering some of these things here. We're not going to cover data files there, so you have to pay attention to this seminar. Nick will be posting this on our website, on the Yahoo, or not Yahoo, but the YouTube site that we have you can get to from our website. So if you need to review any of this, you can go back and listen to it again, or you can come to Vegas and ask me questions, of course, in person, which would be the best way to do it, or call tech support if you need to. Anyway, that's it. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank everybody for coming. Hope to see you all again in Vegas. Those of you that are not going to be in Vegas, continue to listen in every Thursday. Those of you that are coming to Vegas, please make sure you listen in for the next Thursday, these next weeks leading up to it, because again, we are going to be covering things we are not going to be covering in Vegas when you get there due to the short time. All right, everybody have a great week. Go out and sell lots of Keystroke, and we will see you all later. Take care.